Mind, Mood and Microbes, the revolutionary science between your gut and brain. Your moderators for this session are the dynamic duo of Lisa and Alana Macfarlane, or the Mac twins. Previous DJs and presenters, they're now democratizing everybody's understanding about gut health. And they're CEOs, co-founders of The Gut Stuff, exploring how the symbiotic relationship with the microbiome influences the cognitive neurological conditions ranging from Alzheimer's disease to Parkinson's and beyond. And in discussion with them is Professor Jane Foster, Department of Psychiatry and Behavioral Neurosciences at McMaster, exploring Neurodevelopmental Disorders Network in the province of Ontario and involved with the Canadian biomarkers in depression. Again, researching the interaction between microbiome, the immune system and neurodevelopment. And last but by no means least is Raja Dhir, co-founder of Seed Health. And they're taming microbes and developing the next generation of probiotics with scientifically validated evidence-based treatments to get it out there into the market for everybody at scale. And with that, over to the sisters. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, hi, we're Alana and Lisa, co-founders of The Gut Stuff. The Gut Stuff was set up to educate everyone in the power of gut health and the microbiome. We actually started The Gut Stuff as we were part of twin research at King's College under Tim Spector, and even though we have 100% the same DNA being identical twins, we actually only have 30 to 40% the same microbiome, and this very much got us onto the journey of being so passionate about gut health and wanting to spread that good gut word.
And I guess one of the things that fascinated us most was the link between the gut and brain. And that's what we're going to discuss today. There's now strong evidence to support the inextricable relationship between your gut and your brain, from anxiety to Parkinson's and Alzheimer's. And when we were initially starting The Gut Stuff, we interviewed loads of scientists and we were like, speak to us like toddlers. And the gut-brain axis was the thing that we asked the most questions about. So yeah, we're fangirling a bit here with Jane and Raja. They are fonts of knowledge, and if Alana and I get a bit carried away with questions, please do rein us in because we're going to allow you guys to ask questions as well at the end.
Now, we do know this is not just a microbiome specific conference, so it would be amazing for us all to get on a level playing field when it comes to what the microbiome is and a bit about the science behind the gut-brain axis. Jane, would you be okay to be teacher for the next couple of minutes and just let us know exactly what the microbiome is and then explain a bit about the gut-brain axis and how they're connected?
I've got my pencil case at the ready. It's my lesson.
Yeah, so the microbiome, really has launched itself into the public domain in the past decade, most particularly. But what we're referring to there is a whole host of microbes. They're bacteria, they're viruses, they're fungi, they're parasites, they're protozoas, and they cover all of the surface of our body. So the composition and the diversity of them vary depending on where we look on the body, but they're everywhere in the body. So we have 100 trillion bacteria, for example, in our gut. We have 1 trillion bacteria on our skin, and we have 10 million bacteria in our mouth. And so these microbes are little factories. They're essential to our health. And the crosstalk between the microbes and different host systems is actually best encapsulated by the term the gut-brain axis, which has been studied for hundreds or even longer, hundreds of years, if not longer. And that talks about this system that connects your brain, where your brain has a top-down control over all parts of your body by both your nervous system connections or by releasing soluble products into your blood that can act at different parts of your body. But the bottom up is the discovery place where we've been in the last 10 to 15 years of understanding how these microbes in our gut influence our brain. And so that happens through, as we know, the inner tube of life, which is the gastrointestinal tract where all of our food and other products pass through, which is wrapped in this enteric nervous system, which is about 500,000 neurons. That's sort of like a plexus around, and it's important for gut motility, but it also is a first responder to soluble things and other signals or metabolites that come from your gut bacteria. And then in addition to that, there's nervous connections between your gut and your brain. but also there is immune cells in your gut's very important to your immune system. So your immune system can be a messenger from your microbes to your brain, as well as metabolites that are either produced by the microbes themselves or influenced by the presence of your microbes. So what's really exciting, as Alana said earlier, is in spite of the fact that we have identical twins with exact 23,000 genes of DNA the same, their 2 million genes that make up their microbiome are completely different. And so our microbiome actually makes us who we are.
Yeah, I think that's the thing that kind of fascinated us as we went through the research. Not only did it kind of, and I'm sure we'll get on to nutrition further down the line, blow our minds in terms of everything that we knew about nutrition, but also Alana and I were just super excited that there was something that was different between us, which again, I'm sure we'll get on to. And Raja, in terms of application in industry, could you talk a little bit about what you guys are doing at Seed Health? Because all this, all the science that's coming out is fascinating and great, but how do we then, how do we apply that to industry, and what do you guys do?
Well, I want to caution that there's a lot of hype when it comes to the gut-brain axis, and in many regards, it's much further ahead than where the science really is today. So maybe you see products marketed as probiotics for stress or probiotics for anxiety, but if you really look at the science or the studies behind many of these gut-brain axis claims, they're extremely weak, lack reproducibility, and usually have inconsistent success in their endpoints in their trials. And so I have to get that out there, which is that, yes, there's a lot of information and excitement about the gut-brain axis, but currently there are no products that are effective in what we think the future of the gut-brain axis really could be. Now, with that caveat, the next several years have a lot of exciting work, a lot of breakthrough discoveries, mechanisms that are now making their way into human clinical trials. In the next month or two, we're going to actually announce one of those projects where self-isolation and anxiety and stress response was reversed, both by knocking out the naive microbiome or by adding in different next generation probiotics that work through different signaling molecules to the brain. And so to emphasize and underscore what Jane said, there's, a lot of people have heard of the vagus nerve, which is this highway, but that's not the only way that the gut speaks to the brain. And in fact, some of our research suggests that it's not even the primary means, but rather there's so many neuroactive metabolites that actually can cross the blood-brain barrier. There's neurotransmitters that are involved in local signaling that have effects all over the body. And the system is very connected. And for this audience, something that people are probably interested in are these evolutionary origins or biological evolutionary explanations for things that we observe. And it makes sense that there's close communication between the gut and the brain. The gut's the largest external surface on your body after your skin. And most people don't realize it is an external surface. And so it's very important to use that as a cue and to get sensory information and to pass that back. So I think we're going to see, and certainly we're working on things for interventions for indications like major depressive disorder or stress response, anxiety, and subjecting all of these in randomized placebo-controlled trials.
Amazing.
Yeah.
And I think you touched upon it at the start, is this hype versus hope. And we've certainly seen it with the gut stuff. We've only been in the gut health arena since 2015, and I know that you guys have probably been in it a lot longer, and a lot of other scientists have been in it a lot longer, but we've seen that massive trajectory and steep curve of the hype and the media really jumping on board of the gut, and especially when it comes to the gut-brain axis. But Jane, where are we actually at with the science? How, is there lifestyle tips we can give you? Is there general advice? Like Lisa and I know that, it's so personalized. For example, if we can't be sold the same lifestyle tip or supplement, then it would be difficult to do a sort of mass market approach. Where are we actually at with the science?
So I think one of the biggest, a lot of the science has been based in the animal studies that people like my group did early on, but those have extended out to clinical populations, and there's been a lot of work done in healthy individuals. I think about 7 or 8 years ago, people asked the question, what is the healthy microbiome? And in those areas, we've learned a lot about the factors that affect our microbiome. So in addition to how our own DNA influences who's there and how they function, diet matters, geography matters, stress matters, as Raja said, and these different factors can influence this interaction between our microbes and all our body systems. And that's actually the important discovery of the microbiome. And what that means is we can leverage that in clinical situations. And as was noted, I work in the world of depression. And in clinical depression, there's a big problem because everybody looks different from a clinical perspective. So what if this microbiome, which I think is a representation of how our DNA and our environment over time has interacted, can be used as a biomarker to determine what type of depression we might have? And so that's the science is moving towards microbiome-based biomarkers or microbiome-based therapeutics to tackle areas in psychiatry or in neurology where we just currently don't have the tools up to speed.
Yeah, and I guess one of the kind of big tensions, Jane, and we touched upon this in our pre-chat, is how do we start to explain this to the public and consumers in a way that is honest about where the science is at, but excited enough that people are like, oh yeah, I should really start to learn more about this. Whose responsibility do you believe that to be?
Well, I think that one of the things that is great is the idea of all of us here today, right? Mm-hmm. A basic neuroscientist who, started in bee brains and now works in people as well as mice, along with stakeholders that in the public who've become engaged, and industry partners who are actually funding and developing new alternatives. So I think that the more people we can get in the game, the faster we can do. I mean, one of the reasons why cancer makes such great progress is there's so much investment. So we need to invest not just the money, but we need to draw in the experts who have the innovative tools and apply them to this. So the microbiome field is fabulous because there's so many different areas of science. Like me talking to you guys today is not a novel thing for me in that perspective. I get invited to all sorts of fun things because there's not enough of us doing it. So I think that what we really need to do is engage everybody. And that's the most important sort of thing. And even people in their own spaces can think about it, right? Like how does your diet, your exercise, and those other things affect your GI health? Well, that probably affects your brain.
Yeah, and I think, everyone's there with heart health, aren't they? Like we understand there's a lot of different factors that influence it. And when you were setting up the business, Raj, I'm curious to know where you met with a lot of pushback, or that's woo-woo, or the science isn't there yet. What are you doing?
Well, I think that actually in some ways we were driving a lot of that pushback. So Seed is a bit different in that regard because we built the science on the backs of mostly academic research. And so a lot of our collaborations are with researchers or scientists like Jane that are past the point of a certain discovery. And where we're really the most effective is in that mechanistic validation, that scale up, putting it through clinical trials, getting out past publications, and then more like on that development side. Now, there are areas where we're doing very exploratory research, but it's actually more in our environmental division. And it's funny that Jane started in bees because most of our research and environmental stuff is on the soil microbiome. We're going to announce a coral microbiome project soon. And the honeybees, of course, was one of our biggest initiatives over the past few years. And so I think that to also answer your question, one very good way of energizing the public and bringing them into the field is not just making it about human biology, but when you think about the thread that microbes and bacteria provide that connect us to most other organisms, it's pretty inspiring, honestly, and it's one way in, I think, to capture the imagination of the public.
Yeah, I think it's certainly a thread. We did a talk last week around, and it was about agriculture and sustainability and how the microbiome is actually a thread throughout all those things. And I think it can be a penny drop for people when you start to talk about all these things in one space. And it's kind of the why piece, I guess. Jane, it'd be interesting to hear about some of your studies in depression and what you found there, because I think it's definitely for a lot of people, when the media, and we have a lot of questions, particularly on Instagram about this, when the media get hold of some studies and it's like a bit of sauerkraut is going to cure your depression, and it's so sensationalized by the time it gets out there. What have you found in your studies across many years?
So as I said earlier, my lab is interested in this connection between microbes and the immune system. And so I started my lab looking at how the immune system affects the brain, all in animal models. Definitely, I was a basic scientist when I settled in here at McMaster University. But I landed in a very clinically rich environment. So our first work was actually using mice that have no microbes at all, using the germ-free mice, and we showed they had less anxiety than the average mouse. So this has been repeated in mice, it's been repeated in healthy individuals, it's been repeated in clinical populations. This link between how somehow your microbes influence both your immune system, but also your anxiety phenotype and sometimes your depressive phenotype. More recently, what we think is most interesting we've been doing is we've actually been looking at the immune system itself, and we find that these T cells, which are one of your types of immune cells that respond to pathogens and other things that come into your system, they actually are essential for the microbes as well. So the microbes send a signal that helps your immune system, educate your immune system, but your immune system sends the signal back. So that just sort of points to this early life space, right when we're born and we're establishing our microbes, that our systems are talking to each other, and that is developing a healthy brain. So that's really what we do in my lab. And some of the most interesting things that have come out of my lab recently are who are some of the metabolites that, as Rajesh said, that we have these neuroactive molecules that are being made by these microbes, and they're in your gut. And some of those are influencing the CNS. So how is that connecting? How does the microbes talk to the immune system? How does the immune system talk to the brain? So those are the teasing out those things. And which of those are the best targets if you're going to work to optimize your, for example, healthy aging or healthy development? Right? I mean, it does make a difference how we feed our kids and, what they do in those early windows when they're wiring their brain, because that sets us up, for a better trajectory over the lifespan.
Yeah, Alana's growing a human at the minute, so has been reading up on loads.
Yeah, I was reading something yesterday about prenatal diet and the links to child's behavior for up to the age of 2. So yeah, no pressure on what I'm eating. But I think the thing that we get asked a lot about at the gut stuff is what actually does a good gut health look like? And we sort of know that it's linked to diversity. And Jane, would you be able to expand on that a bit?
So I think that good gut health is good heart health. So I think that's the easiest, and people tend to know what good cardiovascular health is. I think that we have to pay attention. So I don't know that, like, when we think about diet, and people have done a lot of work looking at different habitual diets, whether you're a vegan or an omnivore or a vegetarian. And what a lot of that work in the end shows is that the individual differences are in our own systems. So for example, if I eat the same thing every day, my microbes and my body's going to respond to it the same way. If you eat the same thing and I eat, your body is going to respond a bit differently. So while that sometimes, goes into this not reproducibility across different groups or something, what happens when we start looking at the metabolites and the function of the microbiome, which is where the world is moving to a little bit more, that becomes an important thing, is what the function is, or the genes in the microbiome that are turning on and off, they're the same in a lot of different people. So I think we have to move the bar up to what are we measuring in the microbiome so that we can, get better resolution about how translatable is this, how universal are some of these good health choices.
Yeah, and I think as well that we want as punters to simplify it. You're just like, can you just tell me a bacteria that I need to have? And it's like, or, is there a specific bacteria to have? We're actually getting questions in already. We've got a question from Molly that says she would like to learn more about gut microbes and mental health. Welcome. Hope you've learned something already. Raja, are there any specific organisms related to mental health status, such as dementia, depression, burnout?
Well, yes and no. So probably the most exciting finding of the paper that I've read in the past couple of years was, it came out a couple of months ago in Science Advances, and it actually moved beyond just looking at your gut microbiome, but moving into what's called a combinatorial panel. So yes, you look at your gut microbiome in terms of what species are there, but then you also look at what metabolites are in your blood serum and in your urine. And when you're just looking at your microbiome alone, so if you only care about species, maybe about 60% of the time, and for me, something is a good test if it has predictive power. So if you can give someone a blind sample and you can predict that this is a gut microbiome, or this is a sample or a host that has major depressive disorder, and you can do that blind, that's moving past hype into real science, right? And we saw that when that happened with cancer diagnostics with Grail, like, that was a big breakthrough in diagnostics, at least. And so maybe you can get about 60% accuracy, but you get a lot of false negatives, some false positives when you're just looking at the microbiome. But when you add in different metabolites in serum and urine, you can push that up over 95%. And so, yes, the answer is that there are microbes that are implicated, but it's not the whole story. And here's why. Similar to the point about why there's not just one healthy microbiome, right? And similar to the reason why I have a huge pushback, not against the concept of personalization, but the way that personalization is marketed today. Because there's a lot of what's called functional redundancy within microbes. So completely different organisms of completely different species can perform within an ecology the same function, right? So you have to understand what organisms are doing, and sometimes they're in co-aggregated pairings, sometimes they're within consortia. Like, it's not something which is just in isolation. And I say all that with a caveat that, yes, there are studies that do show certain microbes are very protective or are associated with a pretty well-defined mechanism for areas like mental health. So I'd reference a paper from 2019 by Jeroen Reyes out of Belgium, where they looked at over 1,000 different people in a Flemish cohort and controlled for antidepressant use, which is huge. And they found that 2 organisms were consistently found in people that did not have major depressive disorder, and were consistently depleted in individuals that did. And these are the organisms of the taxa Coprococcus and Dialystra, I believe. But that doesn't mean that those are the only 2 ones. That means that there's a ton of neuroactive potential of microorganisms, which you have to look at more holistically. So it's kind of boring when I like caveat everything that I say, but there's not a probiotic for mental health. You can't find that today. It doesn't, you won't be able to do that. Companies that market that are lying. There's not good data, but we do now know that the gut microbiome and a lot of signaling molecules and neuroactive metabolites are closely related with mental health, specifically depression.
Yeah, I think my best way to get my head around that, if anyone else is thinking, is basically you can know who's at the party, but you don't know how they're going to behave at the party. Is kind of a really simplistic version of that. And Jane, we've got another question, and it's something that we again get asked a lot, and it's very chicken and egg. But could depression or other mental health conditions be the origin of gut health disorders? Or is it potentially the other way around, in terms of gut health disorders and dysbiosis can cause depression and other mental health conditions?
So I think that there's no debate. The reason why some of the early advances in this field came from individuals who are interested in functional bowel disorders who also were monitoring anxiety. So anxiety and other mental health conditions are so highly comorbid in functional bowel disorders, but I think that the situation is probably mixed. So there's been some good work, in fact, looking at some of the impacts of some probiotics in individuals with functional bowel disorder and anxiety. And in some cases, what they find, even if they don't resolve the the functional bowel disorders, they can resolve some of the CNS symptoms in those individuals. So I think that it depends on the individual. So a lot of functional bowel disorders or things with GI issues, there might be an aspect of how that's increasing inflammation in general, which is bad for your gut, and it also sends signals to your brain. But in a subset of individuals, you still have those problems without any obvious gut problems. So again, it comes down to these different probably subtypes of individuals. So I would expect that there are ways in which, particularly if you're a highly stressed individual, activating the stress axis in your brain can impact your microbiome. But if you have GI problems and damage to your gut, that can affect your brain. So the answer is it goes in both directions.
Yeah, we've had one more question that's not directly linked to the gut-brain axis, but actually could be further down the line. I'm interested on the impact of cesarean sections in the gut microbiome of the newborn. Is there much research going on in this field?
So when we're born is when we get the exposure and the initiation or the big push to develop our microbiome, which happens over the first couple of years of life. If we look at when our most like adult environment has, and if you're born by vaginally, you get your microbes from the vaginal tract. As you go down, you gobble them up. If you're born by C-section, you actually get your microbes from the skin or the room that you're in where you're seed. So that seed is different. So it does interact with other genetic risk factors and other aspects. It also makes a difference of, why did you have a C-section? So if it's an elective C-section, which happens here in North America more often than it does in Europe, that might have a different consequence. So yeah, it's a pediatrics and the first 1,000 days, as we call it, through conception through 2 or 3 years of life is a very active area of research. There's a lot of work being done, and a lot of those things influence risks of allergy, even autism, anxiety. So again, I think choices and situations in that time period really can impact health. And one of the best demonstrated areas is in the area of allergy or even obesity. Some of those lack of microbes at the point. I think in the long run, we'll find those links to mental health, but I don't think we've done it well enough yet.
But breastfeeding can have a rescue effect. So if you are born through cesarean, the human milk oligosaccharides in breast milk can help that microbiota converge at around 3 months and 6 months back to what a vaginal born child looks like. So there's kind of like of antibiotic usage of the infant, breastfeeding, and mode of delivery. You kind of want to get 2 of them right.
Yeah, because I think that's important to say as well, is like the things that mothers to be have control over, and sometimes with emergency C-sections it's very difficult to talk about it. But it's, as you say, like there is other things that you can do and other things to consider as well, other than just kind of mode of birth. When we started talking to our friends about vaginal swabs, they were like, "We know we've lost you to science now, guys." And Raja, we've had another question, and you've kind of touched upon probiotics, but is it known which specific foods are beneficial to support microbes for better mental health?
Well, nutritional psychiatry is actually getting its heyday finally. And I think part of the challenge there is what I referred to earlier about how, if I eat one food and you eat it, we're going to have different responses from the bottom up. But again, that's where it's almost, in some of the more recent, daily monitoring the microbiome with things, it's more the types of food that you eat, the fruits and the vegetables, the berries, the green products. Those are all feeding your microbes. And the thing about your microbes they're, as I said, little factories. They can ferment the dietary fiber in your foods that you eat and make these great metabolites, which are referred to as short chain fatty acids, that benefit your intestinal barrier and also have a benefit to other systems, including your brain. So I think that those I'm in Canada, we have a health food guide, right? So it's number of fruits, vegetables, and other things. The high sugars have clearly, and high-fat diets clearly do not have a beneficial effect on anybody's microbiome or their, potential for health. So I think those are part of it.
Yeah, I think that's, sorry, Dr. Kyle.
It's more about what you don't consume than what you do. I mean, again, to go back to from an evolutionary perspective, humans across time have subsisted on any number of different dietary combinations. And it's not until, very recently that I think, of course, we're tracking it better. And so there's a correlation bias, but the rise of modern living is implicated a lot more with processed foods, the use of different additives and antimicrobials and antifungals and pesticidals used within the food industry, lack of soil diversity. I mean, it's hard to pinpoint any one thing. Maybe it's different, Jane, in Canada, but in the United States, we have a very bad nutritional food pyramid that still recommends highly processed refined oils, very little amounts of healthy fats. They're consider ketchup to be a vegetable serving. I mean, there's it's not, I think, and actually even the American Heart Association diet, we're finding that a lot of the typical low fat, high carbohydrate dietary recommendations are actually not that conducive to long-term health. And so I think I would actually challenge, at least for us, that assumption and to use current guidelines. I think we're starting to find now the flip side to this, and the strange part is that it's not rocket science. Like, actually, the less you think about it, the better you are. If you try to just get diversity from a lot of different plant sources, if you can tolerate it. If you have GI issues, it's going to take some time, and it's a feedback loop that can make your GI issues worse and vice versa. But the ultimate perfect diet is one where you don't actually think about it a lot, but you're making sure that you're getting a micronutrient rich, high plant biomass, highly diverse, with many N3 fatty acids. I mean, that's really it. Like, I don't want people to obsess and think about it more, because take diet off the table, and then you can think about other areas of improving mental health and optimizing your nutrition and not obsessing over diet. And actually exercise probably plays just as big of a role, if not more, than your nutritional inputs.
Yeah, that was actually something that surprised us when we were initially going through the research. Was like, everyone was just saying fiber and stuff that our granny used to tell us. And it wasn't, hopefully, Raja soon, a magic pill created in a lab that was hundreds of thousands of pounds. It was basic stuff that our grandparents told us. And I think that that's empowering. But I think it's also can lie with the confusion in people, because they think it needs to be, a super restrictive, cutting out gluten, dairy, fun, everything. And we're running out of.
The last fun fact is that the Hodzins, which have one of the most diverse microbiomes, for a portion of the year, they subsist over 50% of their caloric intake is from honey, right? Like, there's a very, if you're exercising and your other aspects of your life are balanced and your inputs are right, humans can thrive on extremely diverse dietary inputs. We've seen that in there's a reason that blue zones are scattered all over the world. It's not just in one place. So lifestyle, diet, and not, again, like, strong family bonds, good sleep, not overthinking it goes so far. I just want to underscore that point.
Yeah, absolutely. Going back to basics. I've realized that we are running very low on time, and I wanted to ask the question, going back to the gut-brain axis and the current research, where do you hope to see it in 10 years' time, in both research and in clinical practice, Jane?
So I think that I think Raja's comment about precision medicine is both accurate, but also the target for research science. And I agree that it's not going to be by picking out a specific bacterial taxa that we know is present in depressed people or not, but by a microbiota or a microbiome signature that guides treatment in clinical conditions, and also the development of potentially better microbiome targeted therapies. And that isn't just a probiotic. It could be targets that, because your microbes also influence, for example, whether or not a painkiller is going to be toxic to your liver. So I think that understanding how the microbes influence how we respond to different treatments is probably going to be advancing as fast as we've understood diet in the last decade. So I think those are the areas where neuropharmacology and other places we're going to advance in the next decade.
Raja?
I think that, or I hope that there's breakthrough research at the edges of life. So Jane said that early life, those windows of development are so important. And ever since I learned about those, I've been pretty obsessed. So think about, starting even from the second or third trimester, optimizing the microbe host crosstalk of that infant through the first 2 years of life. Then maybe you could bank those organisms, and in times of distress or even at the end of life, re-inoculate someone with their own kind of like original microbiome. I think that's an idea it's intellectually very attractive to me. It's actually, I think, the pinnacle of personalized medicine, because it's both personalized, but it's also preventive. One other angle to that is I want to be very careful about broad spectrum microbial therapies, because we know, for example, like a fecal transplant will make at least 40% of people that were non-responders to cancer therapy, they'll make them responders, but it could also make you predisposed to Alzheimer's or to Parkinson's, right? Like these things aren't done in a vacuum. And so I think that we think about right now, we're very bullish on the idea that, you can just take anybody's microbiome, homogenize it, and transplant it. And yes, that works in like things like ecological infections. If you have a C. diff infection, any healthy microbiome will work on that, because you're putting in a healthy, balanced ecology that can keep that organism down. But what about if we know that the microbes are driving your risks for so many other things? We have to monitor and regulate that. And that's why I keep going back to this idea of how do you set that infant up early on, and then how do you bank those organisms in a way that are most protective? And I do think that we're going to get out of the hype cycle and get into some really interesting things. And I don't think that it's going to be microbial interventions, but all kinds of things. You can give people viruses or phage that work on a specific kind of like as precision antibiotics. We know, for example, that colon cancer, when you find colon cancer, you usually find an oral bacteria by the name of Fusobacterium lodged somewhere within there. That's something that's very interesting. When people have a risk or family history of colon cancer, which is, I think, the second or third most prevalent cancer now, you can start to act early on, because some microbes might be actually driving that cascade, which results in that in 10, 15, or 20 years down the line. And I think we're going to start to come out with these associations, microbes that work on regulating host cholesterol levels, microbes that work on your risk factor for neurodegenerative disease, that make you a responder instead of a non-responder to cancer, areas outside of the gut, right? So it's actually we talk about the microbiome, but today we've only talked about the gut microbiome. There's the skin microbiome, there's the oral microbiome for things like cavities and periodontal disease. For women's health, we're doing such phenomenal work in partnership with an incredible scientist of the name of Dr. Jacques Ravel in the vaginal microbiome, which is the premier research in women's health, and not just for things like UTI and BV, which are surprisingly prevalent, but even can move into preventing things like preterm birth, which has a massive toll on both the healthcare system and families, and we can't really do anything about that today. So those are the areas that I get really inspired by, and I think we're going to start to see very soon, if we're patient and if we do good science.
Yeah, thank you so much. Honestly, we could do a full festival for 6 months just on the gut-brain axis. So thank you for allowing us to kind of jump around a bit in terms of moving from where the science is at in lifestyle nutrition to what we can see in the future. So thank you for letting us pick your brains. And to those of you watching, I hope this has been enough to pique your interest, and you can go and do lots of bedtime reading now on the gut-brain axis. But I think as a key message and takeaway from all of us, be careful about things that are marketed to you, and how the science is translated by the time it gets to us mere mortals.
Fantastic. Thank you so much to Lisa, Alana, Jane and Raja. What a topic of intersectionality of health and wellness that's helping us unlock discoveries and reframe and understand diseases in a different way.